That was about the size of what Yemen faced on March 15, 2025. Directive launched what was touted as a decisive military campaign against Yemen's armed forces, aiming to dismantle their capacity to disrupt Red Sea shipping lanes critical to global trade and Israeli supply lines. Dubbed Operation Rough Rider, this offensive saw the deployment of advanced weaponry, including the stealthy B-2 Spirit bombers, which took off from Diego Garcia in a display of American technological prowess. At OMT News, we're dedicated to bringing you sharp, no-nonsense analysis on the conflicts shaping Palestine, Yemen, and beyond. We don't do spin. We don't take sides. We dig deep, call out hypocrisy, and break down the complexities others ignore. But independent reporting like this doesn't thrive without your support. If you value balanced, unfiltered discussion, don't let efforts to silence voices like ours win. Like and share this video to push back against the algorithm and IDF internet bots. Subscribe to stay ahead of the conversation. Pentagon's goal was clear: obliterate underground missile and drone storage sites operated by Yemen's armed forces, who have persistently targeted vessels in solidarity with the Palestinian resistance against Israel's actions in Gaza. By April 10, 2025, however, the operation's grand ambitions have collided with a harsh reality. Despite raining down over $200 million in munitions, tangible results remain elusive, leaving the US military's reputation as a global superpower visibly frayed. The opening salvo was dramatic. On March 29th, 6 B-2 bombers, representing nearly a third of America's fleet of these trillion-dollar aircraft unleashed GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, each capable of burrowing 200 feet into the earth before detonating. The targets were fortified complexes in Saada and Hodeidah, where Yemen's armed forces had entrenched their arsenal. US Central Command trumpeted initial successes: 65 personnel killed, a command center in Sana'a reduced to rubble, and satellite imagery showing collapsed tunnel mouths. Yet, within days, reports emerged of Yemen's armed forces adapting new tunnels were dug, and by April 6th, they claimed to have downed a third US MQ-9 Reaper drone over Al Jaf, its flaming wreckage a stark symbol of defiance captured in widely circulated images. The numbers tell a sobering tale. By April 9th, the White House reported over 200 strikes, with munitions costs nearing $1 billion when factoring in operational expenses like carrier deployments and B-2 sorties. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, invoking Theodore Roosevelt's legacy with the operation's name, promised a swift and unrelenting campaign to protect American interests. But the Red Sea, a lifeline for 12% of global trade, remains choked. Shipping traffic has plummeted to 70% below pre-conflict levels from late 2023, per UN trade data. Yemen's armed forces, far from being neutralized, continue their operations, their missile and drone attacks undeterred by the barrage of Tomahawks and JASSMs. This persistence underscores a critical failure. The US overestimated its ability to subdue a determined adversary through air power alone. Yemen's terrain has long been a graveyard for overconfident militaries. The Saudis learned this lesson during their decade-long war, backed by US air support, which ended in a stalemate despite billions spent. Now, Trump's campaign echoes that futility. The Yemen armed forces' resilience stems from a mix of tribal toughness and strategic ingenuity traits honed over years of conflict. Their underground networks, while damaged, were not eradicated. Analysts note that many weapons caches were relocated or reinforced before the B-2s arrived. A Yemeni official, speaking anonymously to Al Jazeera on April 4th, remarked, "They hit stone and sand, but our will is iron." This adaptability has left US commanders scrambling to justify the operation's ballooning costs and scant returns. The human toll adds another layer of complexity. Since March 15th, Yemen's Ministry of Health reports at least 69 deaths from US strikes, including civilians caught in the crossfire, a figure disputed by Trump's video on April 5th, which suggested higher casualties among Yemen's armed forces. In Sana'a, a strike on April 6th killed 4, wounding over 20 when a residential area was hit, per local accounts. These incidents fuel outrage, bolstering Yemen's armed forces' narrative of resistance against foreign aggression. Meanwhile, the US struggles to counter accusations of recklessness, with critics pointing to the accidental inclusion of a journalist in a Signal chat about strike plans. An embarrassing leak reported by The Guardian on April 6th that exposed operational chaos within Trump's team. Across the region, allies and adversaries alike are recalibrating their view of American power. Iran, a key supporter of Yemen's armed forces, has watched closely. On April 3rd, The Telegraph reported Tehran withdrew its personnel from Yemen, wary of direct US retaliation, but this retreat hardly signals defeat. Rather, it's a pragmatic shift to focus on domestic defences against Trump's threats. Iran's nuclear sites, buried deeper than Yemen's tunnels, now seem less vulnerable to US airstrikes, a perception reinforced by Operation Rough Rider's shortcomings. If Yemen's armed forces can withstand this onslaught, Tehran reasons, its own fortifications could render American saber-rattling toothless. The Lebanese resistance, another regional player, has praised Yemen's stand. On April 7th, a senior figure lauded their barefooted defiance against advanced American warships, per CNN. This rhetoric amplifies a growing sentiment. The US, despite its unmatched military budget, $916 billion in 2025, cannot dictate outcomes in asymmetric conflicts. Yemen's armed forces, with rudimentary but effective tactics, have turned the Red Sea into a no-go zone for Israeli-linked shipping, a blockade they tie to ending Israel's Gaza offensive. The US response, meant to restore order, has instead highlighted its limitations, eroding the aura of invincibility that once defined its superpower status. Economically, the fallout is stark. The New York Times reported on April 4th that US commanders worry the Yemen campaign is draining munition stocks needed to deter China in the Pacific. 2 aircraft carriers, B-2s, and Patriot systems redeployed to the Middle East stretch resources thin, with congressional aides noting a potential $1 billion resupply cost by year's end. Meanwhile, Trump's reciprocal tariffs, enacted April 9th and raising Chinese imports to 104% per CNN, compound global trade woes already worsened by Yemen's actions. The irony? America's attempt to secure shipping lanes has deepened the chaos, pushing allies to question its strategic coherence. Yemen's armed forces have seized the narrative. Their April 6th claim of downing a US drone backed by footage of wreckage counters Trump's assertion of decimating them. Social media amplifies their defiance. A post on X from Our Shangxi Muscle on April 4th noted the US getting embarrassed in Yemen is exactly what everyone who knew anything about Yemen said would happen. This sentiment resonates. Locally, rallies in Sana'a on March 30th saw children waving Palestinian flags, linking their fight to a broader cause. The US, cast as an aggressor, struggles to spin its campaign as a defense of freedom when civilian deaths mount and results falter. Trump's personal touch-posting strike footage on April 5th with a flippant "oops" hasn't helped. The black-and-white clip, showing a missile obliterating a gathering, aimed to project strength, but backfired. Yemen's armed forces called it a strike on a tribal meeting, not a military target, per Al Jazeera, accusing the US of intelligence failures. US officials admit privately to CNN that the campaign's limited effect stems from Yemen's fortified bunkers, a lesson from past operations ignored in the rush to act. This misstep, alongside the Signal leak, paints a picture of a White House more focused on optics than outcomes. The Pentagon's own metrics betray the operation's hollowness. Central Command footage from April 6th shows fighter jets taking off, but lacks evidence of destroyed arsenals. The Atlantic's Robert Worth argued on April 8th that Trump's war has no strategy and is likely to backfire, a view echoed by Yemeni resilience. Their ability to absorb $200 million in bombs equivalent to Yemen's annual health budget and keep fighting suggests a miscalculation of their endurance. The US, banking on shock and awe, underestimated a foe seasoned by decades of war, From Saudi campaigns to civil strife, internationally, the cracks in America's image widen. Allies like the UK coaxed into joint strikes. See little return Red Sea shipping remains paralysed. Per Reuters, April 6th-a-day guarantees security. Yemen's armed forces draw strength from their cause. Their Red Sea campaign, launched November 2023, has fired over 100 missiles and drones by January 2025, per India Today, aiming to pressure Israel over Gaza. Trump's escalation, tied to this blockade's resumption after Israel cut Gaza aid in March, frames them as defenders of justice, not disruptors. A Yemeni official told NPR on April 6th, "We promise the greatest defeat you will ever suffer," a vow backed by their survival. This moral clarity contrasts with US claims of protecting trade, muddied by civilian casualties and strategic drift. The domestic US angle is equally damning. Congressional frustration grows $200 million in 3 weeks, per the New York Times, prompts calls for oversight. The Atlantic reported on April 6th that lawmakers see Houthi arsenals intact, hidden in bunkers the B-2s couldn't crack. Public fatigue with endless wars, the 2024 election theme, clashes with Trump's bombast. His April 4th Truth Social post, "They will never sink our ships again," rings hollow as Yemen's armed forces persist, their drones buzzing over wreckage-strewn deserts. Regionally, Yemen's stance reverberates. The Palestinian resistance, via a March 30 rally in Sana'a, finds a kindred spirit. The Lebanese resistance hails their grit. Iran, per Reuters on April 6th, seeks indirect talks with the US, wary of escalation but emboldened by Yemen's example. Trump's April 9th sanctions on Iran aim to choke their support, yet Yemen's armed forces endure without Tehran's boots on the ground, a testament to self-reliance. This autonomy challenges the US narrative of an Iran-driven axis, exposing its inability to sever these ties. The environmental cost is grim. Strikes on Hodeida's Ras-Issa port, reported by Euronews on April 6th, risk oil spills in a sea already battered by conflict. Yemen's fragile ecosystem, 80% of its 30 million people food insecure, per UN 2025 figures faces further strain. US bombs, meant to secure trade, threaten a humanitarian crisis with USAID cuts under Trump, noted by CNN on April 8th, slashing aid to Yemen's south. This irony destroying to protect undercuts America's moral high ground, amplifying Yemeni grievances. Trump's rhetoric falters under scrutiny. His April 5th claim of foiling a Yemen attack, per Ynet News, was debunked by locals as a civilian hit. The White House's 200-strike tally lacks context. Saba News on April 6th pegged one as a social Eid visit, not a military site. Muammar al-Eriani, from Yemen's exiled government, claimed 70 fighters died, but no evidence supports this. Yemen's armed forces, per AP on April 6th, report 6 dead in Sayada, a fraction of US boasts, suggesting inflated success metrics that crumble under independent review. The psychological edge tilts to Yemen. Their April 8th claim to Euronews of absorbing strikes while planning reprisals mirrors a honey badger's tenacity bitten. They rise to fight again, per CNN's analogy. Trump's relentless promise, per The Atlantic, meets a foe inured to war. Their tribal roots in northern Yemen forging a resilience US planners overlooked. This mismatch high-tech versus grit echoes Vietnam or Afghanistan, where willpower trumped firepower, denting America's invincible sheen. Allies feel the strain. The internationally recognized Yemeni government, per The Atlantic on April 8th, laments US neglect. No diplomats, cut aid, accidental strikes costs soar, and insurers balk, per Reuters' April 5th tariff fallout. The US, aiming to restore flow, has instead cemented Yemen's leverage, a strategic blunder that reverberates from London to Tokyo. Yemen's narrative gains traction. Their April 4th X post from Ab-Amalrai, 200 airstrikes, to facilitate Israeli goods, frames them as principled, not lawless. Trump's counter, per CNN on April 8th, ties strikes to Iran's nuclear ambitions, but Yemen's survival undercuts this. The US, bleeding cash and credibility, faces a foe whose losses 69 dead per NPR pale against their gains in stature. This asymmetry exposes a superpower stretched thin, its dominance questioned. The US military's own warnings ring loud. The New York Times on April 9th cited commanders fearing a Pacific shortfall munitions spent on Yemen weakened deterrence elsewhere. Trump's April 9 tariffs, per The Guardian, royal markets already hit by Red Sea woes, a self-inflicted wound. Yemen's armed forces, with less than 1% of US spending, dictate terms. A David and Goliath tale that resonates from Sana'a to Beijing, eroding America's global clout. History looms large. Yemen's defiance mirrors past US quagmires Iraq's insurgency. Afghanistan's Taliban, where air superiority faltered against resolve. Trump's April 5th video, meant to awe, instead invites scorn. Yemen's armed forces call it a civilian strike, per NPR, flipping the script. The US, once a guarantor of order, now fuels disorder. Its image as a superpower fraying with each bomb that fails to break Yemen's spirit. By April 10, 2025, Operation Rough Rider stands as a cautionary tale. Yemen's armed forces, battered but unbroken, have turned Trump's gamble into a mirror reflecting US limits. The Red Sea bleeds, allies waver, and rivals take note. America's might, once unassailable, now bends before a foe it can't conquer. Yemen, with its rugged will, has not just survived, it has exposed a superpower's cracks, reshaping perceptions from Tehran to Washington in a world watching closely.